Welcome to the debate. You know, there is a very specific, almost universal feeling you get when you are tracking a package you've ordered online.
Oh, definitely.
Right? You watch the delivery status update day by day. Out for delivery, arriving soon. The anticipation is, well, it's palpable, almost electric.
Yeah, your mind just becomes completely consumed by the possibilities of this object. You are essentially living in the future, right? Experiencing the reward before it even arrives.
Exactly. And then it arrives. You tear open the cardboard box, you hold the item in your hands, and within minutes, the thrill it completely evaporates.
Just vanishes.
Gone. You are left standing in your hallway with a new gadget and this profound, hollow sense of, is this it? So today, we are examining that exact phenomenon, the paradox of satisfaction. Why is human satisfaction so fleeting? And why does getting exactly what we want so rarely bring us lasting happiness?
It's a fascinating question, and we're going to explore this through two highly compelling frameworks from the psychological literature. On one side, we have the neurochemistry of dopamine and desire, and on the other, the opponent process theory of acquired motivation.
Right. Two models that offer fundamentally different blueprints of our affective architecture, basically the invisible machinery that governs our emotions and our drives.
Exactly.
So my position is that this paradox is an evolutionary quirk of our dopamine system. It biologically drives us to constantly seek more, but I believe true fulfillment can actually be achieved by consciously shifting our brain's activity to present moment neurochemicals.
And I have to push back on that, because I view this paradox as a rigid, biological zero-sum game dictated by the opponent process, meaning every pleasure automatically generates physiological stress and pain. So true satisfaction is fundamentally impossible to sustain, though. We can harness this system by embracing temporary discomfort.
Let's unpack the neurochemistry first. When we talk about wanting something, whether it's that online package, a promotion, or, a piece of food, we are talking about the ventral tegmental area of the brain, the VTA.
Right, a very ancient part of the brain.
Evolutionarily ancient, yes, deep inside the skull, and it produces dopamine. But we really have to correct a massive public misconception here. Dopamine is not the pleasure molecule.
Not at all.
It is the molecule of more. It evolved to maximize future rewards to drive survival and reproduction. I mean, if our ancestors were perfectly satisfied after finding one single berry, they would have starved.
Right. Dopamine kept them searching, which creates this incredibly powerful biological divide between wanting and liking. It is pure wanting, completely divorced from liking.
And that divorce is what creates the trap. Imagine walking past a bakery. The aroma of freshly baked pastries hits you. Your VTA fires up, dopamine surges, and triggers this intense craving.
Oh, I know that feeling well.
Right? It convinces you that a chocolate croissant is the ultimate key to your happiness. But dopamine is just a travel brochure. It is not the vacation.
That's a great way to put it.
The dopamine circuit operates entirely independently from the circuits that allow you to actually enjoy things in the present. So you eat the croissant, the dopamine shuts off because the pursuit is over, and you realize the pastry isn't actually as life-changing as the craving promised.
It rarely is.
Exactly. The brain is quite literally wired to maximize future rewards, not to make us happy in the present moment. Lasting satisfaction, therefore, requires a structural transition in our behavior. We have to purposefully move away from desire dopamine and activate the here and now chemicals, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins.
The chemicals that allow us to actually experience contentment in the present.
Precisely.
Well, the travel brochure analogy is vivid, but I think it ignores the physical reality of the crash that follows. Dissatisfaction is not just about dopamine blindly looking to the future and then quietly shutting down.
What do you mean by quietly shutting down?
I mean, it is an active physiological suppression by the brain. And this brings us to Richard Solomon's opponent process framework. The theory posits that the brains of all mammals are organized to automatically oppose and suppress all emotional arousals.
Wait, so you're saying the brain actively creates a negative state just to fight the high? How does that actually work mechanically? Why would evolution program us to ruin our own good time?
Because the brain is frankly terrified of biological extremes. Think of it like a thermostat fighting a sudden draft in your house to maintain a stable room temperature.
Homeostasis.
Exactly. Homeostasis, the body's desperate need to stay at a stable, safe baseline. If your heart rate, blood pressure, and excitement stay at a peak forever after eating a meal or finding a mate, you would literally exhaust your physiological resources and die.
Okay, that makes sense from a survival standpoint.
So the brain deploys neurochemical brakes. When a primary emotion occurs, let's call it state A, right? The initial joy of your croissant or your package, a sluggish but incredibly powerful opponent process is triggered.
And that would be state B?
Yes, state B. And state B always has an emotional and physical quality perfectly opposite to state A.
So the joy of state A literally triggers a corresponding pain in state B?
Exactly that. To understand the raw power of this mechanism, you just have to look at the research on social attachment in animals.
Like what specifically?
Well, if you present a moving mother surrogate to a 5-hour-old duckling, it experiences state A. High excitement, visible pleasure, positive reinforcement.
Right, it imprints on the surrogate.
But the moment you remove that imprinting object, you don't just see a duckling calmly looking for a future reward, like a dopamine model might suggest. You see a severe withdrawal syndrome.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes. After a delay of just 5 to 10 seconds, the duckling begins frantic distress calling. It is in physical agony. The B state has taken over. It is a physiological counterattack by the nervous system.
That's intense.
It is. Therefore, you cannot simply choose to live in the present with here and now chemicals, because every acquired motive is governed by these rigid laws. The brain actively manufactures pain to counter your pleasure just to force you back to baseline.
But this underlying mechanics doesn't just stop at fleeting cravings or ducklings, right? If we apply this to something much more deeply ingrained in the human experience, we can really test these theories.
Where are you going with this?
Let's look at romantic love.
Okay, a big one.
Through the lens of dopamine, the thrilling early stages of love, the honeymoon phase, make perfect evolutionary sense. When you meet someone, the rush of excitement is powered by dopamine, projecting a rosy, idealized future together.
It gives you the boundless energy to pursue the partner, to stay up all night talking.
Exactly. But eventually, that honeymoon phase has to end.
Because the brain inevitably habituates to the stimulus.
It does. But I don't see that as a tragic loss. When the passionate, dopamine-fueled fades, it is a necessary biological transition. The relationship matures into a more gratified, stable state of companionate love.
Driven by those here and now chemicals you mentioned earlier?
Yes, oxytocin and endorphins take over. They allow us to bond, feel secure, and cherish the present reality of the person, rather than constantly longing for an idealized future. It is a harmonious biological handoff that allows a couple to actually build a life together.
I hear that, but I look at the clinical data and I just don't see a peaceful, harmonious handoff. The opponent process theory reveals that love obeys the exact same empirical laws as heroin addiction.
Heroin addiction?
Yes, it is mathematically identical.
I see the structural overlap you are gesturing at. But isn't it incredibly cynical to reduce the deep bond of, say, a 30-year marriage to mere addiction maintenance?
It is not about cynicism, it's about observable mechanics. Look at the primary process. The initial joy of new love is a massive state A.
Right.
But with repeated exposure to the partner, the brain builds a psychological callus. The positive reinforcer loses its potency. The thrilling peaks flatten out.
Because the novelty wears off.
More specifically, because the sluggish B state, the opponent process, the brakes, has been strengthened by repeated use. It occurs faster and lasts longer. The end of the honeymoon phase isn't a magical transition to companionate joy.
Then what is it?
It is simply the dominance of the B state. What people interpret as a warm, companionate feeling is frequently just the avoidance of the severe separation distress that has built up over time. You stay close to the partner because the psychological withdrawal syndrome would be too agonizing to endure.
I have to challenge that framing. Dopamine gives us circuitry to plan and build, not just raw, primitive craving.
But the craving is the foundation.
There is a complementary dopamine circuit, though, often referred to as controlled dopamine, that allows us to comprehend, analyze, and craft a life with someone. We don't just stay with a partner to avoid the pain of a biological withdrawal symptom.
You think we have more agency than that?
I do. We use our highly evolved frontal lobes to actively build a shared reality. We construct meaning.
The fact that we use control circuits to manage our lives doesn't negate the underlying affective dynamic, though. And since you brought up control, let's examine what happens when behavior completely escapes our control.
You mean like in severe addiction?
Exactly. The mechanics of addiction perfectly illustrate the ruthlessness of the opponent process. Consider opiate use.
The shift from chasing a high to fleeing a low.
Precisely. Initially, the drug produces a peak state A, the rush, the absolute euphoria. But what happens with repetition?
The A state habituates. The user stops feeling high altogether.
Yes. But the negative B state, the abstinence and agony, lengthens dramatically. It becomes a massive physiological craving. The user's motivation shifts entirely.
They are no longer seeking pleasure.
Line resting state. They are performing what psychologists call an operant behavior, meaning they are executing an action purely to turn off a painful internal alarm.
Which is a terrible cycle to be trapped in.
It is. The positive reinforcer has lost its power entirely, and the negative reinforcer dictates their existence. This demonstrates that we are not simply pushed by desire, we are trapped by the brain's punitive response to our own pleasure.
Look, I don't disagree on the destructive, tragic nature of addiction. The devastation is real. But I frame the causation differently.
How so?
This loss of control happens precisely because desire, dopamine, that primitive, deep-seated I want, entirely overpowers the rational decision-making circuits in the prefrontal cortex.
It's a system hijacked.
Exactly. The dopamine system is obsessed with keeping us alive. And in the case of addiction, it mistakenly categorizes the drug as the ultimate survival resource, more important than food or water. But because we understand this mechanism, we also know the solution.
And what is the solution?
The antidote is mindfulness. It is actively engaging with one's surroundings and rooting oneself in reality to break the cycle of impulsive future seeking. When we focus deeply on the present, we quiet the VTA.
I'm not sure it's that simple.
Well, we starve the dopamine craving by flooding the brain with actual, tangible sensory experiences.
I hear this argument often, but it assumes that mindfulness can somehow bypass the affect control system. It cannot.
Why not?
Because if you engage in a pleasurable present moment activity repeatedly, the opponent process will still generate a B state. You will still habituate. The brain's accountant always collects its due.
Not if you achieve harmony. The psychological literature explicitly addresses this balance. A wandering mind, constantly scanning the horizon for the next dopamine hit, is fundamentally an unhappy mind.
Sure, I agree with that.
But the true antidote to dissatisfaction is creativity. Creativity is unique because it is the ultimate balancing tool. It takes the drive, the planning, and the ambition of dopamine. Say, the desire to paint a masterpiece, or write a novel, or cook a complex meal.
And then?
And it blends it with the here and now sensory input of the physical act itself, the smell of the oil paint, the tactile sensation of chopping vegetables. You achieve happiness by balancing our ambitious nature with present moment fulfillment. You align the two systems instead of letting them fight.
That sounds beautiful in theory, but psychologists who study the opponent process point to a much more radical and frankly darker antidote to dissatisfaction.
Darker? In what way?
Some researchers refer to it as a sort of Puritan's theory of social philosophy.
Oh, the idea that pleasure itself is a source of physiological stress.
Exactly. We have been conditioned to believe that trauma and aversion are the only sources of stress. But repeated pleasures breed suffering because they guarantee a massive, punishing B state.
So what is the logical path to positive affect, then?
Well, if pleasure leads to pain, the inverse must also be true. The path to lasting happiness is actually through aversive events.
Wait, seeking out pain to feel good?
Yes. Consider the studies done on military parachutists. During their very first free fall, before the parachute opens, they experience absolute terror.
I can imagine.
Pupils dilated, irregular breathing, an intense state A of pure fear. But what happens after they land? They don't just return to a neutral baseline.
They feel relief, right?
More than relief. The removal of that aversive state A reveals the sluggish B process, which, because it opposes fear, is highly positive. They chatter, they smile, they experience prolonged exhilaration.
So the B state of fear is joy.
Exactly. Or, for a more everyday example, think of the dread you feel before an incredibly intense workout, or stepping into a freezing cold plunge, or a painfully hot sauna. You endure burning sensations and psychological resistance.
But stepping out produces an immense, lingering relief.
Right. Because the B process retains its integrity over time. Surviving an aversive state A provides an enduring source of positive well-being. Fear and pain actually have overwhelmingly positive biological consequences.
That is a fascinating mechanism, but I would frame the application differently. Are you suggesting we treat our emotional well-being like a rubber band?
Intentionally pulling our psyche into the painful, terrifying zone just to enjoy the snapback? Doesn't that trap us in another cycle? Constantly chasing extreme stimuli rather than finding actual peace? It is not about constantly chasing extremes. It is about acknowledging the biological reality of how the brain calculates emotion. The state rule of the brain is always the magnitude of state A minus the magnitude of state B.
Okay, math.
If avoiding all discomfort is your goal, it means you are also mathematically avoiding the deepest reservoirs of physiological contentment. The parachutist's exhilaration persists long after the jump, even through subsequent odious tasks. The positive B state endures.
So you're saying if you want a lasting positive mood, initiate it with a negative reinforcer?
Yes, it is counterintuitive, but it is empirically observable.
But doesn't that inherently require a constant escalation of pain? If you habituate to pleasure, you also habituate to pain. The parachutist stops feeling the terror after the 50th jump.
That's true.
So the state of fear diminishes, which means the B state of exhilaration must also disappear, right?
No, actually. And that is the brilliant, beautiful symmetry of the system. As you habituate to the aversive event, as the fear diminishes, the opponent process, the B state, actually strengthens.
Really?
Yes. It occurs faster, reaches a higher peak, and takes much longer to decay. Think of it like building a physiological callus. The veteran parachutist feels almost no terror during the jump, but experiences a robust, incredibly long-lasting exhilaration afterward. The pain decreases, but the reward increases.
That's wild.
It is the exact inverse of drug addiction, where the pleasure decreases and the agony increases.
Precisely.
So you are arguing that we should become essentially addicts to beneficial pain, marathoning, cold plunges, intense physical exhaustion. I am arguing that the laws of acquired motives are the laws of affect. We don't get to choose whether the opponent process operates. We only get to choose which side of the equation we want to heavily weight. Do you want the pain up front or on the back end?
It is a relentlessly mechanistic view of human experience, but I have to return to the concept of internal control and mastery.
Okay, let's hear it.
What you are describing, jumping out of planes, sitting in boiling saunas, freezing in ice baths, are extreme external stimuli. They rely on shocking the nervous system from the outside. The dopamine framework offers a path to mastery that comes from within.
From within? How?
When we utilize control dopamine, we aren't just reacting to stimuli. We are calculating, modeling the world, and executing a plan. Think about achieving mastery in an activity, whether it is woodworking, coding complex software, or writing a book.
All difficult things.
Right. You develop an internal locus of control. You take responsibility for your reality. You aren't just a passive organism waiting for a B state to kick in to feel relieved. You are generating a sustainable, balanced satisfaction by physically engaging with the reality you have shaped.
But let's be honest about what mastery actually involves. It involves struggle, it involves deep frustration, repeated failure, and immense cognitive effort. Those are highly aversive states.
They are challenging, yes.
When you are writing code and it fails for 3 hours, you are in a negative state A. You're miserable. When you finally solve the bug, the immense wave of satisfaction you feel is the B state. You are describing the exact same opponent process, you're just wrapping it in the romantic language of mastery and harmony.
The crucial difference is intentionality, though, and the resulting neurochemical profile. The satisfaction of solving that coding problem isn't just relief from the pain of failure.
It isn't?
No, it is the active secretion of here and now neurotransmitters. It is the tangible engagement with the result. If it were merely the opponent process, any pain would do. I could just hit my thumb with a hammer and the relief would feel like writing a great novel.
Well,
But we know that meaningless pain doesn't produce mastery, it just produces trauma. Meaningful engagement, directed by controlled dopamine and experienced through here and now chemicals, is what builds a genuinely fulfilling life.
I would argue the brain doesn't care about the meaning of the pain. It only cares about the intensity and duration of the stimulus. The affect processing system is essentially a dumb mechanism.
A dumb mechanism?
It perceives a departure from baseline and it deploys the opposite neurochemical response to pull you back. The meaning is just a cognitive narrative we overlay on top of standard biological reflexes to make ourselves feel like we are in charge.
That is fundamentally where our perspectives diverge. You see the cognitive narrative as an illusion painted over a reflex. I see the cognitive narrative, powered by the advanced circuitry of the frontal lobes and controlled dopamine, as the defining feature of human satisfaction. We have the architecture to transcend the simple reflex.
To a degree, perhaps, but we ignore the reflex at our own peril. We see the casualties of ignoring it everywhere. In addiction, in the despair of sudden wealth when the purchases stop bringing joy, in the collapse of relationships when the honeymoon ends and people mistakenly assume they have fallen out of love rather than recognizing a predictable biological shift.
On that, we are entirely aligned. The misinterpretation of these biological signals causes immense suffering. As we wrap up this debate, I want to summarize my position.
Go for it.
The paradox of satisfaction is solved by recognizing that dopamine is a tool for progress, not a reward in itself. It is the engine that gets us to the destination, but it cannot make us enjoy the view. By consciously shifting our focus from endless future desires to present moment creativity, mastery, and companionate love, we can actually master our biology and find harmony.
And my summary is that biology dictates the brain will always inevitably suppress extreme emotion to protect itself. The brain is an uncompromising balancing scale. Acknowledging that pleasure is a highly fertile source of physiological stress and that temporary, structured discomfort can yield lasting positive after effects offers a much more realistic approach to human motivation. It is a challenging view, but it aligns perfectly with the empirical data of how our nervous systems actually function.
What we undeniably converge on is this: relentlessly and blindly chasing the next pleasure, the next hit of desire, is a mathematically guaranteed path to suffering. Whether it is because dopamine can never be satisfied or because the opponent B state will eventually crush you, the blind pursuit of more is a trap.
The unexamined pursuit of pleasure is the most dangerous game an organism can play.
The frameworks we've discussed today hold incredible depths of insight into how these biological laws govern the microscopic details of our daily lives. There is so much more to explore in how we form attachments, how we break habits, and how we construct our values.
Understanding these mechanisms fundamentally changes how you view your own desires. It makes you question every craving.
It really does. So the next time you are standing in your hallway, staring at that newly opened cardboard box, feeling the thrill evaporate into thin air, you will know exactly what is happening in your brain. And more importantly, you will know that the emptiness you feel isn't a failure of the product. It is just your biology waiting for your next move.